and look forward to its passage very shortly.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, it gives me a lot of pleasure to speak in support of the motion, and I want to begin by acknowledging Honourable Jerry Brownlee, Member of Parliament at the current time for Ilam, and commend his passion for this bill, for this area, and indeed for his own electorate. I wish to repeat the expression that I used in an earlier part of this debate, that I just wish that the Minister, Member of Parliament for Ilam, shared that same passion for heritage buildings in our city and was able to exude the sort of amazing ability to not only bring this legislation through but ensures that it has support, I think, unanimously across the House. I wish he was able to use those skills to ensure that what we've been seeing in Christchurch, the cranes and the bulldozers rolling over beautiful heritage buildings that by engineers' report could be saved and are being demolished but for lack of money and commitment and vision and leadership. I just wish the Minister would turn his attention to that. Perhaps now that this bill is reaching its final stages, he might have some spare opportunity to look around our city and help preserve what is left. Mr Speaker, I also want to acknowledge, as the Honourable Nick Smith did in his prior contribution to this debate, I want to acknowledge the people who originally looked at Riccarton Bush and said this is worthy of special protection, the people who first put this into a legislative protective measure and say that's the sort of vision that I'd like to see more of, particularly in Canterbury at the moment. The trustees who prepared this bill alongside the legal services team of the Christchurch City Council also should be acknowledged. In the scheme of things, this bill is quite small for Parliament to consider. It's not a bill that has had hours and hours and hours of debate or has had hundreds of submissions. But actually for the people who prepared it, the trustees, the legal services team, others who are interested and supportive of the cause, they certainly have put a huge amount of effort into it, and I want to acknowledge them. I also want to thank the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, which not only considered this bill, but quite properly, but at their own effort, came to Christchurch to hear the submissions on the bill. So I'm very pleased that they did that. There are only 2 submissions heard. They were both in support. That's not the point. They made the effort to come to Christchurch, and I'm very pleased that they gave this bill and the member who's introduced it the respect that they deserve by doing that. There have been some very minor amendments made in this bill through that select committee process, Mr Speaker, and I think that's a bit of a reflection on the rigour that probably went into its preparation. It's interesting to note that alongside this bill, the Local Government and Environment Select Committee is also looking at the changes that the current government are pushing onto local authorities by taking out the 4 well-beings in the local government legislation, and how upset and distressed every single local authority around the country has been at that gutting of the mandate of local authorities. I've sat at the Select Committee and watched in amazement at the embarrassment of National Party members as mayor after mayor after mayor have come in and complained about it. And it is surprising that this bill that has, under the regime of a local authority, the management of a very special piece of bush, is sitting alongside the gutting of what local authorities are able to do in terms of the overall economic and social well-being of their district. I wonder how this bill would fit alongside it if it was being considered in terms of the well-beings being taken away from local authorities, and I'm sure that that has occurred to the Select Committee as they've considered both of these pieces of legislation. But, Mr Speaker, the fact remains that it's going to be supported by this Parliament, and I'm very pleased to have my name put alongside it. I just want to reiterate the point I made earlier, that as we are watching protection deservedly of a very important part of Canterbury, we are at the very same time seeing the wholesale destruction of much of the heritage of our city, of our region, and its heritage that could be saved if we had demonstrated by the Minister responsible for Canterbury earthquake recovery the same sort of passion that he has demonstrated in regard to this bush. I know that he has that ability, because he's demonstrated it through his process. I actually think he's probably got the passion for those heritage buildings as well. Perhaps now he will have the time to see that done. It's particularly frustrating when you see that about $196 million was spent on making Eden Park in Auckland a place which was fit to host the World Cup. And, you know, what a great sporting event that was last year. But in Christchurch, we've seen less than $10 million from the government put into supporting the retention and making safe and repairing our heritage buildings. So it just doesn't weigh up, in my view. Once those heritage buildings are lost, we can't recapture them. We can't suddenly recreate the decades and decades of architectural commitment that we've seen from them over that past time, let alone the emotional commitment that people have to their buildings. We have many that are going. The Littleton Port Tunnel building is the latest one to have the SERA sign-off for demolition, one of Peter Bevan's buildings, one which isn't particularly attractive, actually, but that's not the point of architecture. It's what it represents in our timescale of architectural design and ability and commitment in our region. So that's another building that's going to be lost for the sake of just a couple of $1 million. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very supportive of this bill. I look forward to that vision and that time now being made from the member to the rest of historic structures in our region that are worthy of that same support.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, there is much of which Ruth Dyson said about the importance of